Thank you for the kind invitation. I very much appreciate this opportunity to come back to speak at Pharma 4.0 conference on transforming pharmaceutical manufacturing. Thank you, Suppression Science. Thank you, Ernie Heller. The chaos of lockdowns and the chaos in multiple systems precipitated by the COVID-19 pandemic poses many challenges in how we manage pharmaceutical quality in and beyond the COVID-19 pandemic. So what is this presentation really intended to do? Let me explain that with a background of my previous talk. Previously, in 2020, I provided an overview of 21st century initiative followed by a discussion of few observations of what I felt were signs of immaturity in our systems, immaturity due to sensitivity to initial conditions and precipitating chaos. Considering chaos as a system, in 2019, I had proposed a path forward chaos to continuous improvement and explained that context in the previous presentations on Pharma 4.0 considerations for pharmaceuticals as well as biopharmaceutical manufacturing. I'll share with you the links to those presentations, so those who have not or may not recall that or were not in attendance to that will have access to those presentations. What are the challenges in 2021? The epistemic crisis has deepened, and I'll explain what that means in a moment. Multiple systems are now chaotic. Fear and anxiety is unabated, and as expected, the dominant response to crises appears to be procrustean. Scenarios to consider managing pharmaceutical quality design space in traditional paradigm and in emerging SMARTness. That's the question in my mind. So taking questions in my mind and sharing my exploration of the answers, this talk essentially provides insights, advice, and solutions, the why, how, and what. Why epistemic, procrustean, and design space, which originated 20 years ago, are still on my mind. How should we select options to be more effective in managing pharmaceutical quality in and beyond COVID-19 pandemic? What solutions make sense to prioritize? That's really what this talk is about. Here is a selection of 3 slides from my talk in 2020 on transforming biopharmaceutical manufacturing. My exploration of the answers to the questions in my mind really is an experiential learning process, and I utilize contemporaneous notes of how I feel, how I think in different contexts with different observations is something I practice to approach problem solving from first principles. And for instance, in 2017, at the end of 2017, I could sense then, we'll remember 2017 as a year of confirming an amazing juxtaposition of feeling, thinking process and the observations on the ground. Jump, frog, jump while you can was the thing. So the notion of boiling frog was on my mind in 2017. And in the 2020 presentation, I took that learning experience in 2017 to 2020 to put in context. FDA claims to expedite the development of newer technologies. The agency has developed a series of leapfrog guidance documents. And I found the paradox in my 2017 learning of the boiled frog and the leapfrog use terminology that FDA used. Advantage leapfrog over boiled frog, surely. Let's be clear about characteristics of leapfrog. Is waiting for a crisis to trigger regulators and bureaucrats to guide innovation, not a recipe for boiled frog. The reason I'm sort of sharing that with you is my talk is about experiential learning, and to do that from first principles, from and being objective and being rational and reason in our thinking process is a challenge often. And how do we address that challenge in learning from our experience is the point I want to make later on in the talk. But at the same time, I think I like to take a systems perspective to things and think about chaos as a system. Pharma 4.0 demands fifth order leadership and fourth order professional suitability and capability for transforming biopharmaceuticals beyond 2020, and was the message in my paper on chaos to continual improvement, path to harmonization, which I wrote for CPHI in 2019. So what I want to share with you is I'm trying to bring a narrative forward of an exploration of the challenges that we are facing from an experiential learning perspective, and put that in the context of professional development. In 2017, also had an opportunity to do an assessment, an outside-in assessment of a set of presentation by Martin Van Thiestel, who used to be the chief quality officer at Amgen, and their journey from 2004 at the end of the 21st Century Initiative at FDA towards a low error rate of 3.4 defects per or errors per million opportunities in every processes that they have in their facilities. And that was an important learning experience for me. It sort of builds from Pharmaceutical Industry Has a Little Secret article in Wall Street Journal 2003 to the notion of FDA approved and validated and their behavioral impact on if I don't look, there is no problem. Letting FDA find the mistakes, FDA find you're giving away your responsibility to FDA instead of taking responsibility, and how Amgen approached that in 2004, why investigations are important, stuff happens, thus began their journey. We are here to serve patients, and at the end of 2014, 82% of parameters performed at Six Sigma level, and so on and so forth. But the key was it took leadership to be able to take responsibility for quality management, and that case was a very useful way to think about professional development and how it relates to systems management. And in that case, Martin had graciously reviewed and confirmed the accuracy of my outside-in look and suggested to me to emphasize human performance because he also felt human performance was the key. Here are the links to my previous talks, but also other talks where I have elaborated on FDA push for Industry 4.0, FDA pilot on quality management maturity, and FDA collaboration with the National Institute for Standards and Technology, NIST, which is a key collaboration on measurement uncertainty, which has been a consistent problem within the pharma sector. And I will not get deeper into those FDA push for Industry 4.0 or quality management maturity pilot or the NIST collaboration, but they will be part of the narrative that follows. I also gave a talk saying goodbye to NIPT. In this conference, my association is still with NIPT. I'm no longer with NIPT. And so I'm speaking as an independent person. Industrial policy, NIPT, and goodbye to NIPT, I think is a useful talk that you might appreciate. And the link is provided. The epistemic crisis has deepened. Did we leapfrog to give a shock to the system with the warp speed? Could we have communicated better? Could we have prevented what has become the reason for mistrust in the system, not just with the public, but within the scientific community? We are censoring our colleagues. We have shut down debate. Science is debate. So in collecting my thoughts for this talk, I looked at within my network. People are talking about regulatory capture. And the way I'm looking at it is we are in chaos. And in chaos, you have all possibilities, good and evil. Are we using default and nudges of behavioral economics for a propaganda in science? In chaos, the answer can be yes and no simultaneously, and it can be mind-boggling. And yet we have to find a way to be objective. We cannot ourselves become procrustean. We cannot be the judge, jury, and executioner. Somebody who takes on the role of judge, jury, and executioner becomes a dictator, becomes procrustean. So how do we, in this chaos, in this pandemonium, how do we maintain our cognitive abilities to understand and make good sense, I think is a key topic that I want to talk to you about. We are privileged to be working in a sector which by law and regulation demands us to be good practitioners, that demands evidence-based decision making. Yet, as scientists, we are not perfect. We are practitioners of science, a method. When I look at, I always go back to the year 2000 because that was the year we launched the discussion on PAT initiative. And I go back to how science works in the reference manual on scientific evidence, the Federal Judiciary Center, which is how the federal system considers science in the US. And so the chapter on how science works in the reference manual on scientific evidence, second edition 2000, is a very useful paper, and I provided a link to that which you can download. Scientists are not Popperian falsifiers of their theories. They don't need to be in a good system. A good system is complicated. That means cause and effect relationships are not self-evident without a certain level of scientific training and experience. So you have to match the level of complexity, not level of complication in terms of cause and effect relationship with our scientific training and experience. And I'm using the word scientific training and experience very deliberately because those are the words in our law, the Food and Drug Cosmetic Act. So the law requires us to make decisions on adequacy of evidence fairly and responsibly since 1962 after the Kaifa-Harris amendment of the FD&C Act. That's the foundational basis on what this talk is about. Today, there is a reason to be concerned. How can we ensure we have a good system in the prevailing chaos? The added complexity that takes away or is a reason for mistrust is freedom from liability is ensured through the Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act. All authorized vaccines will be protected from lawsuits until 2024. A public-private partnership was needed to warp speed the development. Big profit for big pharma and ensuring complete immunity from lawsuits, and also CDC, FDA granted sovereign immunity. Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely is the general theme that we have to. I'm not worried about corruption in terms of financial aspects, because those our system corrects very well, or at least they follow the money is an investigative process. One can correct for that. What I'm worried about is corruption of our mind, and how do we ensure we maintain a good system to provide scientific debate, scientific discussions, getting closer to the truth, to the evidence of safety, efficacy, and quality. That's where my focus is. Learning from experience. What is experience? Experience is to feel, not just counting the number of years to list on a resume. It is to feel. And our traditional education and training does not provide us a basis to deal with our feelings. We discount our feelings as professionals. We keep them aside. But in chaos, in anxiety, in fear, there is no way of separating our emotions from our thinking process. It's confounded. We have to account for it. So how to feel the shadow of the future across a life cycle is the question. And that's what transforming is about. Transforming is about changing the way we make meaning of our experience. Transformation of pharmaceutical manufacturing and transforming ourselves go hand in hand. To, to feel the shadow of the future comes from evolutionary biology and game theory that suggests that we only cooperate because of repeat business or repeat rewards or repeat paycheck. But the same words can have much deeper, much profound meaning, and that's where I want to go next. To feel the shadow of the future in a life cycle context, we have to take a development stance. And I'm sharing with you some of my recent writings that relate to the topic directly or indirectly, and just a recent discussion on epistemic crisis in the world with a Google search, which I did recently, so that you can explore why we are in an epistemic crisis from your perspective. To summarize the background, a journey without traveling is what professional development is all about, because we are traveling in our mind. Change, choice, and principles. We choose our joys and sorrows long before we experience them. Already, we have seen initiation of investigations by Congress and others, whether the system is making decisions fairly and responsibly in the context of evidence of effectiveness. Similarly, will we be faced with similar investigations for years to come? This reminds me of the year when I joined FDA. It was the tail end of the generic drug scandal. The experience then, the experience now are similar, not the same, similar. That's why epistemic, procrustean, and design space is back on my mind today. The goal is to engage all of us together to make decisions wisely. My smartphone, not me, is learning from my experience, is the subtitle of an article I wrote for Pharma Times in India. Why do I sense that our smartphones are learning from our experience and not us? How can we feel the shadow of the future extending beyond the next paycheck, quarterly results to the next decade? Hence, building on my current advisory engagements, I have collected a few options for us to consider. At the end of 2017, I step by step disengaged from my advisory role for pharmaceutical companies and expanded my advisory role for technology companies. So at the moment, I advise about 10 technology companies, which are solution providers to the pharma sector. One of those, for example, is Applied Material and Smart Factory. So, so for this talk, I have taken the digital plant maturity model adapted from Bioforum Operation Group, which is a principle behind Smart Factory, from putting the foundation in place to enterprise connected system, data standardization to cloud, cross-platform analytics, move from reactive to predictive, optimization, knowledge management to end-to-end automation, maximum return on investment to artificial intelligence, IoT, and 4.0 implementation. And continued that contextualization to human development. Sense making as practiced as part of the process analytical technology FDA team building really is a critical process for managing pharmaceutical quality. And that is a very specific solution hidden in plain sight, which I want to elaborate on. The PAT guidance, a framework for innovative pharmaceutical development, manufacturing, and quality assurance, finalized in 2004, was a pilot program, was a door opener to the pharmaceutical CGMPs for the 21st century, a risk-based approach, and then to the ICH, desired state of pharmaceutical quality in the 21st century, which brought in ICH Q8, Q9, Q10, and now ICH Q14 is spiraling back to improve Q2, for instance. So the key there was take the system as we have and improve it. That was the model that we adopted. And the diversity of thinking about process validation, about quality within FDA, between the CMC reviewers, the CGMP compliance group, and the CGMP investigators who do the GMP inspections. We wanted to leverage their different backgrounds, their different context, by providing them a basis to understand to the extent they can understand based on their technical know-how, but to make sense from first principles. That was a common bringing together of a system that has checks and balances and that can achieve good decision-making process. So process understanding was defined in the PAT guidance, and the PAT team building to make sense from first principles was built into the training program, was built into the team building program. And if you scan that, you will be able to see a nice article on PAT Team Shall We Dance, published in 2005 in Pharmaceutical Manufacturing. The idea was very simple. The knowledge pyramid, data derived from trial and error experiments, decision based on univariate approach, causal links to predict product performance, mechanistic understanding, would be the way over time the system would evolve to get to hardcore scientific evidence. But during the transformation process, each CMC reviewer, each compliance officer, each CGMP investigator can bring their first principles to what is quality, validity of a process, and what are the risks from their first principles to question each other and to achieve a common sense of the decision that a team comes about with. What I have not generally talked about publicly was the idea of sense making came out of a sense making symposium 23rd to 25th of October 2001. That report is very useful. It's available publicly, and you have a link provided. The experiential learning, the PAT inaugural workshop within the Center for Drug Evaluation Research was scheduled and was conducted on 9/11/2001. It was in order to prepare for the FDA Science Board meeting scheduled on 16th of November 2001. So you can see that workshop. Obviously, at the coffee break, we realized the world has changed. We had to cancel the workshop. We couldn't go to our offices. All offices were closed. So the PAT has a deep experiential meaning for myself. The world has changed generally. And with a last name like Hussain, my job became more difficult. You would know why. So sense making today is a very elaborate topic in many different disciplines of organizational development and other aspects. I'm not referring to sense making process from the theory of sense making in those disciplines. I'm purely bringing to you a practical approach to sense making, which came out of this report of sense making workshop. And that simply says that we seamlessly travel between physical information and cognitive domains. So if I start at data, we convert data to information in the information domain. And when we review that information, we have an awareness. And if you're working in a team, you share that awareness of the implications of that information to be aware of situational awareness. Our situational awareness is influenced by our prior knowledge and our way of thinking, our paradigm. Between our discussions, we understand the implications of that information, but that understanding is subservient to our prior knowledge and paradigm. In chaos and uncertainty, our prior knowledge and paradigm often are insufficient. So we have to make sense of that. At the same time, just think about multidisciplinary aspect of pharmaceutical quality. You have chemists working with LC mass spec. You have a biopharm person working with dissolution test. They don't understand the nuances of each other's expertise. So their understanding has to be shared in terms of what is common. And they have to make sense from their first principles of what is commonly understood as this is valid, this is not valid. What is validity of an SOP? What is the validity, repeatability, and reproducibility? And how do you calibrate a measurement system is where we start making sense. Here, the measurement system is our cognitive processes influenced by our assumptions, dogma, beliefs, and hidden agendas, emotions, expectations, incentives, and motives, which are subconscious in our discussions, but there are strong influences. So once we have a shared understanding accounting for those considerations, we have our intention to take action. We have a decision. We execute in order per policy, and we comply to SOPs. The outcomes and observations provide us data, and data is converted to information. So we cycle and cycle through these things seamlessly, intuitively, and bringing awareness to do it consciously provides an opportunity to learn from experience. Concluding validity of evidence, failure and responsibility is the key responsibility that we have. Validity of evidence is in opinions, legacy regulatory mandates, and advancing science and technology. So at the start of the PAT initiative, the 3 qualifying batches was the dominant mindset of of validation, process validation. To a large extent, an opinion, which got mandated as a regulatory requirement. And to advance forward with science and technology to ensure that process validation was representative of commercial operations, the nuances in commercial operations where the supplier changes, the people change, the pressures, the business pressures exist. Are we capturing that? Remember, we moved to multivariate, multidisciplinary, compartmentalized knowledge management and so forth over the years. But our approach to quality remained univariate in our thinking, and that was not able to handle the complexity of the challenges we were facing. Understanding is limited to prior knowledge, paradigm, and legacy education, training, and experience, which is 21 CFR to 11.25. So sense making from first principles can be first principles of physics if you are a physicist. Sense making from first principles can simply mean the reproducibility and repeatability of an SOP at one level. So the first principle are functional first principles here, which allow us to identify and distinguish between opinions, legacy mandates, which are no longer science-based, to making sense of what is validity in science and technology, advancing science and technology. That was the basic aspect of sense making. Epistemology, how do you know what you know, or how do I know what I know? Asking that question repeatedly becomes a decision support tool that can be applied at the level of situation awareness. When you're speaking to someone, looking at the same set of information to say, this is what it means. How do you know that? What is the basis for that? So in that sense, I think making sense, practicing making sense by asking some key questions. How do you know what you know? What is the question are you trying to address? How sure do you want to be? And what assumptions are you making? Becomes a practice that can be embedded in meetings, one-on-one meetings between a supervisor and a supervisee, between team meetings, between board meetings, and so forth with respect to quality, becomes a way to think about decision support tools that intuitively can happen, but doing that consciously and making as part of the meeting minutes and agenda, I think, becomes the key. And when you do that, see, we live and work in systems, and we have to improve those systems from within. The only way we can improve the systems from within is by changing the way we make meaning of what is good and what is not. And that is a continual process, and in asking the right questions, we get the right answers. And learning to ask the right questions, I think, is a key here. Meaning making and manufacturing maturity is a column that I write in Pharma Times in India, and I think this is the theme of that column there. The PAT process emphasized at-line, in-line, and online measurements to achieve real-time process control and real-time release. That was the basis for that. And to the analogy of that in our mind is Vision 2020 Plus, the sixth sense of integrative thinking. Can we think of design and systems together? Quality by design and quality management system in an integrated manner was the key purpose of the PAT initiative. Let me share a few historical slides from advisory committee and other meetings from 2001 to 2005 just to give you a sense of what do I see clearly now. Amidst the COVID-19 pandemonium, we are advancing, among other things, EUA mandates, quality management maturity pilot, preparing for smart factories of the future with regulations developed in Industry 4.0 paradigm, which is a paper which FDA recently wrote in 2001 in International Journal of Pharmaceutics. It's a good paper to read. And we continue to spiral guidance development, ICHQ 14 and revision. That's exactly how I had envisioned going from current state to desired state. In 2005, we were struggling. In 2005, we had just finalized biopharm classification system guidance. ICHQ 6A was in place, but the way we are setting specifications were different between Europe, Japan, and US. And agreement to bring in ICHQ8 was agreed upon, and the PAT process was a way to bring the pieces of the puzzle together. And we anticipated spiraling, improving policies as we go along from current state to desired state. That was the model we had anticipated, how we would improve the regulatory management system. Before I came to FDA, I was an academic for 9 years, and as part of my academic research was artificial neural networks, backpropagation of errors of omission and commission to keep learning over a life spiral was an automatic way for me to think about how to help build a better system, a regulatory system. So as an academic in Cincinnati, Gifford Pharmaceutical University was a sister city to Cincinnati, and we had an exchange program. So I used to visit Japan, Gifford Pharmaceutical University, many years before I joined FDA. When I gave my talk, as I was ready to leave FDA, ICHQ 8 was at step 2, signed off on that. So I gave a talk in Japan. And this is the pieces of the puzzle had come together. It started with my concepts of computer-aided formulation design. SUPAC helped establish the Product Quality Research Institute, the Biopharm Classification System Guidance. PAT was in place, then came ICH-Q8. Q9 had started, Q10 what was agreed upon, and so the pieces of the puzzle were coming together. So in that sense, a development stance for integrative design and system thinking was evolving. What I did not appreciate for a long time was that integrative design and system thinking relates to our development, our professional development, our adult development. And I realized that over the years with looking at the struggles in the perpetual crisis in the healthcare. In fact, in 2009, the Institute of Medicine essentially came out and said the continuing education system has utterly failed for the healthcare professionals. We need to focus on development, experiential learning. And in 2018, they came with a proposal of a design, integrated design and system thinking for healthcare education and system. Unfortunately, they were a bit late because the perpetual crisis in healthcare being the third leading cause of death in America, perhaps we should have done that earlier than COVID-19, because in the pandemonium, the system has not done well. So my message is very clear, very simple. Sense making is a way for us to ask the right question and bring in experiential learning. So the epistemology procrustean design space that I have intuitively brought into my discussion over the last 20 years had a deeper meaning, and my journey for the last several years has allowed me to be able to articulate that as a solution, which I'm trying to share with you today. The PAT initiative was building on the work that was already happening within FDA, especially the Biopharmaceutics Coordinating Committee, where we expended significant efforts to improve bioequivalence assessment and move away from one size fits all. For example, Professor Les Bennett essentially said the current US procrustean bioequivalence guideline really need to be changed. And BCS is a non-procrustean advance. We should consider other non-procrustean advances. So the idea of procrustean moving away from one size fits all has prevailed within the efforts at FDA, so there's nothing new. For example, Tom Layloff, then at USP in 2000, but my colleague at FDA, we first proposed advanced quality control for pharmaceuticals in inline process controls at the FIP Millennial Congress in the year 2000 in San Francisco. The whole idea was going granulation endpoint, reaching out and squeezing granules to say endpoint was the old way of doing that, which then became 10 minutes and validated via 3 process qualification batches. True representation of commercial operations became a question. So we needed that level of process control. So the generic drug scandal 1984 was a key which led to former FDA official pleading guilty. Because remember, the FDA, the A is administration. So FDA is prone to administrative pressures as anybody else. So Judge Wolin's interpretation of current good manufacturing practice in the FDA's eyes became the eyes and law of the land. Procrustean one-size-fits-all approaches became the norm, which the Office of Pharmaceutical Science tried to start breaking that down with SUPAC and other efforts. And the therapeutic equivalence aspect, bioequivalence was well addressed. What was not addressed was pharmaceutical equivalence and the CGMP, which is what the PAT initiative tried to bridge with the 21st Century Initiative. I will quickly share some snapshot of historical memories. You can reflect on those in the current context, measurement certainty, type 1, type 2 errors. We are struggling with the same PCR, test predictability, reproducibility, repeatability. We are looking at discrimination, why, how, and what without proper knowledge. And the whole idea of ICH-Q8 opportunity was to integrate design and systems thinking together. And we appreciated that ICH-Q8 was only the start. It's a complex system, involves multiple attributes, goals, constraints, multidisciplinary design teams. It convolutes, confounds uncertainty, variability, and risk. That's the historical legacy. We have errors of omission that we should have done something, but we didn't. They get logged in and approved and dealt as errors of commission, which root cause is unknown, and we keep repeating the same mistakes. So difficult to deconvolute, assess, and then achieve reintegration of disciplinary and compartmentalized decisions. So think designs and systems integratively was a question which I wrote about in 2005. I think we are still struggling with that, and sense making is a way forward, and taking a development stance is a way forward is what I'm proposing to you. One key challenge is, remember, science follows laws and regulations which follow opinions. So we have layers and layers and layers of regulations and practices which may not be science-based. And the knowledge that gets logged in may not be the correct knowledge. So you have to think about new prior knowledge for 21st century assurance of therapeutic equivalence. To make sense and take a development stance, one can utilize the regulatory guidelines, particularly the process validation 2011 guideline and ICH-Q10 guideline, and think about quality by design in a way that the professional development elements, which can be part of your annual product review, can be part of the incentive programs and so forth, are linked to elements of product quality system. And the key enablers of professional development and improvement of quality management system from within are uncertainty management and expectation management. So the P in PQMS are profiteers, patient, professionals, and practitioners. Profiteers who learn to be patient becomes professional, and with practice becomes a good practitioner. To make good sense of your experience and to learn from experience objectively, we need to be aware of patterns of feelings, thoughts, and observations in uncertain and complex context, where we can gauge within ourselves. Are we doing something to look good or be good? That means, are we seeking external validation, or are we confident, self-assured, internally validate, and we can propose a way to do good? Taking a development stance is to take a third person perspective and to see good in the paradox. Good and evil are within us. And either we are imperialist, control freaks, authoritarian, my way or no way. Being good is risk, groupthink, or blind compliance, seeking external validation. And doing good is internal validation, verify before accepting, seek to understand different perspectives. And self transforming is to be able to remain in a position to see good and find solutions that others can do good. We learn by repetition, never give up. So think about each cycle becoming a learning opportunity to become a life spiral. Levels of maturity of a digital biopharmaceutical manufacturing factory can help us appreciate the challenge ahead. Level 1 is foundation, valid paper-based SOPs, and getting to correcting and preventing errors, which was the Amgen story which I shared earlier, which took almost a decade to achieve. Today, according to the Bioforum information, level 3 is the leading edge of as-is condition for the major firms which are members of Bioforum. So they are reaching level 3 of a connected plant. They have several steps to go ahead. And level 5 is the to be state, a smart factory industry 4.0. That is likely to happen in the next decade. But the foundation is good practices, and we make sure that foundation is strong and can withstand the weight of the responsibility that we place upon ourselves in going digital and not becoming procrustean in that process. The answer is in our good practices. Continuing education, training, and experience. Theory to practice is one element, but then non-theory laden observation to continuous professional development is a key to professional development and key to experiential learning. And the healthcare sector has struggled. We all have suffered. And one of our commitment, my wife and I's commitment, is to work towards improving the system so that nobody dies alone next time around. Thank you for listening. This was my journey to 2020. In the never normal world in constant flux, what is good about pharmaceutical quality are our good practices, and in their validity is how we get smart with our unique sensing proclivity. Writing a chapter in the 4th edition of Handbook of Validation and Pharmaceutical Process allowed me to share new prior knowledge in making sense of FDA PAT initiative and its relevance to 2020. I hope you found this to be a useful narrative to help in your development. Thank you, and be safe, and do good and see good.